Alright, we're back for day 9 of the game jam. Today we're going to be adding better graphics. We did do a bit of refactoring in between the stream last night and the stream that we're going to this afternoon. But today main goal is going to be to add graphics. We left off roughly in a state where everything was working for the player. We could test winning, losing. We could test that the spider can actually come down, the tongue is working. We did do some refactoring in between streams, and now the player is working off of a state machine. So there's probably a lot of other things that we can trim, but we did do a cleanup in code, so it's a bit easier to go around and understand how the player is working now and manage the various states. For us, 5 states so far: idle, lick, jump, if the player lost or if the player's won. So this makes it fairly easy to handle with a finite state machine. And it looks something like this. Now the player can't lick when they're jumping, so you hear me mashing space, but the player can lick an infinite amount of times as long as they're under the timeout. So this smooths the game experience a little bit, and it makes it a bit easier for us to do any changes on the player for the near future. The other thing we've done, and yesterday we tested, but it was really hard to try and lose. Now we actually get to the win. The other thing we've added or done since we played around with the sprites folder a bit to clean this up, because today the key things we're going to do in the stream is we're going to start adding graphics. So no more fairy instead of a spider. We're going to add the spider graphics. We're going to add the tile set and the background as well. And if time permits, we'll start playing around with the agreements that we've been wanting to try and implement to fit the theme of the game, which would be goals that the player agrees to follow. And there's a benefit if you succeed for the next level, or there's potentially a debuff if you fail for the next level as well. So we'll play around with the art and clean up the game. We'll add the tile set, we'll add the background. The last thing that we'll probably do on the stream later is we'll clean up the level, because right now there's a mix of testing objects and also testing tile maps. We're gonna probably clean up the level controller to be able to create a net new scene to start from, create a new level from scratch, and have our code ensure that all the components are there for us to create a level the right way. And this should help us create levels quicker. And we're going to play around with a tile map because we've got the new tile set as well. So really taking this from a bunch of development mechanics with dev art, for lack of a better term, and taking this closer to completion and closer to a point where we're able to ship this tomorrow as part of the end of the game jam. So we'll start for the state machine first quickly. All this does is there's a finite number of states that the player can be in. So the player is always going to start idle. When a player is licking, the player is not going to be able to jump at the same time. But the one thing we've changed is the lick animation used to be on a 2-second cooldown. Now there's not going to be a cooldown. The frog can lick and kind of shoot at will. But the jump is on a 1-second cooldown once you're idle. So in between the various instances of the player trying to lick, the player goes back to idle, and the time keeps adding up until the player jumps. So that's pretty much the only change in mechanics that the state machine has brought, but it meant that in the code we can go and remove a lot of code that now belongs in the states. So I can remove this now, and this is almost half of the number of lines in terms of code that's gone in an instant because we've cleaned this up. So the advantage of a state machine or well-built code for for developers is that you'll have the objects responsible for their own things. Like the health right now we're doing with the player, but this could also potentially be a separate component, so that the component is managing adding, removing health, and potentially sending signals if there's a large change or if the player reaches 0. The last change to mechanics that we've done is that when the player is idle with 0 HP is when the player actually loses. So if you're jumping or if you're licking and your HP would go under 0, this is when the player will lose. This is when there's the bigger impact. So we'll go ahead with the art changes first. Just gonna pull up something on the side. The first thing we're gonna do is the spider. So we left the enemy still as the fairy last time we did this. We're gonna hide this now, and what we want here is gonna be the animated sprite 2D. This is using the animations framed from the fly, so we're gonna have to make a bit more changes besides the art, and this is gonna be using components so that we don't basically have the fly hard coded every time, because if I change this, it's gonna change the underlying object. So I'm gonna go to my enemy controller here. And we're gonna add a few things. It might be easier to make this into a new scene actually, but for now, yeah, let's try with a new scene. And the reason for this, so this is going to be a character body 2D. So the reason for this and going for a new scene here is we're going to start fresh. We're going to attach our script and basically define what the player absolutely needs to have. And then once we get into the newer versions, we'll actually leave the implementation of this up to the player. So if we're creating the falling enemy controller, instead of having these that come from the initial object, we're going to give ourselves the room to change this and inherit from something that's empty, and we're going to build this as we want to build it with the right animation, the right herd box. So I'm fine with us keeping the herd box because it makes sense, especially if there's no dimensions for the area, but let's just validate that first. So all it has is the layers, which we can keep, and it's the collision shape that really defines everything. So we could have this built in, but really our goal here is going to be to change our class. So our minimums, we know we need the herd box, we know we need the enemy type. I also want to see the animation player. Or the animated sprite, I should say. And what else is in there right now? We don't need the sprite. The collision, the character object will force us to have this. So I think we're in good shape if we do this. And that's going to let us design our enemies on the fly from scratch. So we can leave this as is for now. And there's absolutely nothing in this scene at the moment. And we're going to go and recreate. We're going to create an inherited scene from this, which is going to be the falling enemy base, because we want to be able to retain the work we've done here to be able to add the falling line and the distance, we'll want this as well. So we're going to change our script here so that we also make sure we've got the falling line here. I'm going to save this scene with my enemy. This is going to be falling enemy controller base. Again, there's nothing in here. This is going to be completely up to us in terms of implementation. The only thing I'll change now that I got the base set up is to replicate the collision layers here. So for the enemy, we'd set up that enemies only collide with themselves. And we're going to make this true here. And this reflects on the underlying object, which is where, or on the underlying, or the inherited scene. So this is where inheritance for scenes is complex and the component pattern is preferable. If you come from a similar background that I do where you're doing back-end code, this is something that takes quite a while getting used to in terms of how the inheritance impacts this. So now that we have our falling controller and our enemy controller, I want a new inherited scene for the enemy, and this is going to be our fly, and we're going to save this and we're going to start replicating what we had over here. So the first thing is we need the collision box. So we did a collision shape 2D earlier. And on the original enemy, let me close a few things to make this a bit easier on ourselves. I'm going to want this one here. Don't need this. I don't need this for now. So on the original fly, we use the circle shape. We could use a capsule. But again, needing the component here means that it's up to us at implementation time. So we're going to do a circle. Similar to what we previously have done, we're going to go find our herd box component and create an instance here. Our herd box is going to complain because it's an area 2D and we need a shape. So similar thing we've done earlier. Go find this. This is going to be a circle shape again. And now because we've got two shapes, we want to differentiate. So I want my collision box for the character object to be something closer to green. So let's make this a bit more, a little bit more transparent. So now there's a difference between the collision box and our collision shape that's going to be the herd box, the area. So this is what comes into contact with the frog tongue and will come back to the object and hits the frog's mouth, and that's what's going to generate the points eventually. We're going to assign these as we create them. We also need to set an enemy type. This is going to be our fly. And now I need my animation sprite, or my animated sprite, I should say. So I'm going to create this, the animation for this. We will create our new sprite frames, or I could actually save these. So I'm going to save these from the previous implementation just to be quicker here. So this is going to be fly enemy sprite frames, which will exist here. I should probably relocate this at some point, but if I go to my fly now, I can quick load this resource and not have to recreate it. And if I remember correctly, we did change the scale, so default animation here is going to be flying. I think I had scaled this down 50% roughly, yeah. And this was 0.5. There we go. And we're already getting closer to our working product here. We're gonna add the sprite. Eventually we'll add an assertion to make sure that this is working as expected. And we'll have to see how this one behaves. I do want my circle to be a bit bigger here, but this is something where we'll have to go and retest that the fly is working as intended here. So I'm saving my scene. I'm just going to validate. The old sprite 2D was the fairy that we used to test things. We no longer need this, so we should have every component we need to get this to work. And the only reason I've not built an assertion just yet is that my existing enemy controller is going to fail if I start using this. So both the spiders and the flies would immediately start failing if I use this. So with this version of the fly, we know that we're setting our animated sprite 2D, and we're not actually using it in code. We could just put an assertion here to make sure that we actually have this before we run, rather than because we're using it anywhere. We would use this if we're using a state machine and there's like different states between flying, wandering around, or things like this, or if there was a custom animation when the fly gets caught. But we don't need this just yet, so we're gonna go test this against our main scene for now. And because these run with the same script, I guess that's the last thing, because they run with the same script and the collisions should all be set to the same values. I think they are of the hurt box, 314, and what's this one? So this hurt box will need this as well. Might be easier if for the hurt box I do 314 here, and if I go to my fly, this is going to be the basic status, and same thing here. Where is my original fly? Here. So my original scene, there we go. So this should match. So now we can go to the main scene and open our 2D renderer. And what I want to do here is add an instance of the fly. Which is this enemy controller. And I want to move this, and it roughly mirrors, if we see the collision boxes here, it roughly mirrors what we had for the other flies. I'm just going to change the transform. There's just too much stuff in front of this right now. So I'm going to remove these. That should... And everything auto selects to the player here. And I crashed my engine. Let's go. Let's hope I didn't lose too much there. So where did this leave us? Okay, without the new version. So I'm gonna hide these from the get-go, and just for a minute I'm gonna hide the player to be able to play with this. So we're gonna go back to our enemies node, create a new instance, and I want to be able to move this. There we go. I'm gonna move this in the middle near, actually I'm gonna move this here. This is enemy controller 4. I think it's this one, yeah. So I'm going to remove this one. So this instance, I'm going to keep this one specifically. I'm going to re-enable my player and everything that was in the way. So we want to see that this fly gets eaten and that there's nothing lost with our changes. So it did get eaten, but we can see, and I'm not sure if someone caught that, but the animation doesn't seem to be triggering. So that's a small issue that we'll need to fix, but at least the rest of the game is still working, and we can now do the same change for our spider. So this animation should be flying. I think the only other thing I might need to do here is for my flying animation to auto load. And I'm wondering if that's the only thing that was missing. I don't think there's any other changes between both the entities. There we go. We only had to make a small change to the animation there. So now we can start working on our spider. So we set ourselves up with a falling enemy controller base that's going to use the same script. We're going to make a new scene and we're going to save this, and this is going to be our spider enemy. And again, similar concept. We're going to start from what we have. So we know we need one collision shape that's going to be this. I can see if I can copy across scenes. It's probably a super bad idea. No, it actually works. Okay, good. Then we need the herd box, and this is going to be an instance, and an animated sprite 2D, and we need our line. I can copy the line as is. We don't need to change this. This is unique to this scene. So we're going to bring the line, and then before I forget about it, I'm going to bring an instance of the herd box, and I want another collision shape 2D, and then the last thing we need to add for sure is going to be the animation or the animated sprite. We're going to give this a shape here, circle shape 2D. Which one is the bigger on the original? This collision shape. I'm going to copy this as well. And on the spider, I'm going to remove that one and add something here. There we go. So we retain roughly the same proportions, and we'll just have to tweak this when we go and start having fun with the sprite frames. So it's time to bring in our new sprite frames for the spider. I'm going to save this as the spider sprite frames. And I'm just saving these so that I have these with the object that I'm using them with, and not, if for some reason I'm making a change or I'm deleting the object, I still have the animation piece that exists. So if I'm ever in a position where I need to potentially transfer this to a different object, it'll just speed up that process. So I'm going to go in my sprites. This is going to be in the enemy. And now we know that we have one horizontal frame and 25 vertical frames. And if we look, this looks roughly accurate. And it looks like everything is fairly close to that last pixel, but this looks really good. I showed this earlier, but we select all the frames, we add the frames to the list. I want to see this potentially at 25 frames per second. There we go. So we've got an animated spider. It looks really good. The only constraint is it looks like it's very much bigger than our collision shapes. And that we potentially need a capsule shape because we want the capsule shape to, like, the spider's body is very much closer to a capsule rather than a circle like the fly. So I'm just going to stop my animation here for a moment. I'm going to call this idle. We're going to make this autoplay, and we're going to delete our collision shape. That was probably overkill. I should have just changed what shape was created here, but collision shape 2D, and instead of using a circle, we're going to use a capsule shape. There we go. And I'm just doing this for now to see where my capsule ends and where the spider begins. So I'm going to make that change here to just bring this back to 0 and move my capsule instead of moving the spider animation. The only worry there is that it might impact our spider thread, but we can play with this a little bit. Now my collision looks good. I'm going to bring this back to the hurtbox component, and it's just a little bit bigger with the head of the spider here, but that's probably the easier way to get this done. And similar to this, if I have my collision shape, I do want the spider to have, so let's make this a capsule and rebuild this. So I do want the bulk of the spider to still collide with other spiders or other objects if there's ever a need to have the collision. So we do want a fairly large collision box, but I do want any area that I'm using to have a larger, generally a larger hitbox than the collision. And this is that anything that needs to trigger something within the object and not actually collide and push the object away gets priority over any collision. Now we need to set all of the required properties for the object to function. So we're going to call this a spider. We're going to use our animated sprite 2D. I want to assign the falling line object that we had, and on the falling line object I want this at the very bottom. The other thing I want to see is if there's any other changes in comparison to the original object. So I did play with the visibility and wanting to show behind the parent. And because I copied this should have taken over. I'm going to reset that positioning here. And the rest of the properties should be roughly what we expect them to be. So now we're going to go to our main scene, and I'm going to delete this spider and add a new one. So I'm going to instantiate a spider and move this roughly here, roughly at the same height as the others. And now let's see how this behaves. We'll just make sure that our original animation is the idle. There we go. So let's go see what this looks like. Oh wow, this looks good. We will have some tweaking to do in code to understand exactly how much pixels we need to take out from the line, and eventually we do need to refactor this line to be something slightly different. Like this is gonna need to be this line is going to need to be a different color. No spider silk is ever red. The last thing I'm curious if we can do in terms of ordering is if we can put this in the background so that at least it shows up behind the spider. Because that's a quick change we can make in the editor, but then everything else is going to be... There we go. This is perfect. This is exactly what I want to see. And now I don't need to make a code change for the length of... I just need to... I don't need a code change for the length of the web that the spider would be coming down from, or from the thread really that the spider is coming down from. I just need to go change the image we're going to be using. So this solves all my problems for now. The only other thing left, and we're going to test that with the scene, but this seems to come a bit too late in terms of the distance to the player, so we might have to do some tweaking with this. There we go, and it looks really cool and the spider gets eaten. But we do need this to appear just a little bit earlier, I think, in comparison to the other spiders. And this is just I don't know. I'll leave it like this for now, and then we'll tweak with it a little bit more. But this looks really amazing. So we're gonna go, and now the next thing is the tile set. So we left in a space where we have our tile map, and it is fairly basic. Water with no waves, whatever. There's a gradient in between the first to the second tile so that the bottom of the water is a bit darker. We've got a new tile set that we can use now, which will replace our platform, and then there's also going to be the water. And I'm going to do this on the fly in the level, which might be fairly difficult for me to implement. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to change the size of my platform. And the reason for this is I'll want to test first and foremost that my new tiles will actually be something that the player can land on, whether it's the water or the ground. So we're going to make a new tile set here. There's going to be 2 physics layers. Yeah, there might be 2 physics layers. How do I configure the first one? So I made one for the water. And I think in the tile set was where I assigned specifically the layer, or no? Trying to remember exactly how I did this. It's collisions with the physics layers, I think. Alright, so if I grab one of these, it collides with the full thing on physics layer 0. So okay, bear with me because we're going to do this one on the fly and we'll see what works and what doesn't. Sorry, I don't need a scene here. I'm gonna go back to, whoa, deleted the wrong thing. So start the new tile set. And what I want for this tile set specifically is going to be Atlas, because then we get our sprite. Go tile set, and we're going to get our SVG file. So automatically create tiles in the Atlas. This is too big. So our tile size is probably bigger here. Just give ourselves more room to work, but okay, so we need to go 48 by 48, I think, for this to work. Texture region size, yeah. So I want to delete a few of these because I want a very specific tile. Actually, I'm wrong. This is not 48 by 48. This is going to be 96 by 96. There we go. Might be easier to start this one. So 96 by 96, now that I know my size. And now it creates the tiles properly. I don't want these because I do want the first tiles here to be attached to the first physics layer. So we're going to do a first physics layer that will be the terrain. And the player is going to collide with the terrain and nothing else should. Actually, if we implement this, yeah. So player is going to collide with the terrain. There's going to be nothing else, and we're going to have terrain's going to be dark. And if I had a second set, and this would complicate collision handling. Let's see if we're able to handle this and figure out which collision layer gets impacted when we land. And let's review the original tile map. But I don't think we had layers here. Yeah, we didn't. This is where we're probably going to want different layers to be able to handle the different collisions. But let's start with this. So forget if there's other things I need to do. Yeah, so this ensures we have collisions. This is going to be in our terrain layer. And this will collide on our physics layer 0. So let's save this here for now, and let's go back to our tile map. And I'm not sure why it's not letting me paint. So it's not doing anything wonky here. It's probably because I had the eraser on. That would explain a lot of things. There we go. So you can probably do this way for now. And I know I got a slight mismatch in coordinates with everything else given the challenges around the height. So this is technically in a different spot, but we have to change the water anyway, so we'll figure out a way to make it work. And I'm going to test just for fun, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to go right through this, or my character is going to stop, which is the other potential thing that's going to happen here. It's really cool when the spider comes down. This is underwhelming in comparison. So we're gonna eat, make sure we make it to the rest of the, or to the end of the level. Even if we collide with one or two. Okay, so it did collide with the terrain, but it doesn't know that it actually lands on terrain. So what we're gonna do here, so we're going to go into our player logic. And now this is on my jump controller. And I'll have to look through the tileset documentation because I want to understand the number of physics layers. Because what happens is we probably have to iterate through physics layer to figure out which layer we're colliding with if there's multiples. Which might be challenging. It might be easier to do this with two tile maps. One that is the water and one that isn't. There has to be a better way to do this, but we're doing this on the fly, so we'll figure out if I'm wrong later when I inevitably refactor this or do a bit of added research. So I want to check here. If this is terrain instead of water. And if that's the case, I'm going to do the same thing that I do when the player normally lands on terrain. I don't need this bit of code anymore. So we're going to restart it. We're going to get to the end. And if this is working, We're basically halfway there. We might just need to do something a bit different when we get to the water. And I still have small frame issues with sometimes the bugs and the way the bugs are colliding or not colliding with the frog. Okay, good. So this is working for terrain. Now we're going to do this for water as well. There has to be a better way to do this than based on which layer we're colliding with. And I'm not sure if that's feasible with body entered. And it looks like Reddit's had the same idea. So trying to detect when the player is colliding with different physics layer inside a tile map. And that would be based on the tile data, which would be very interesting to get. So adding custom data to the tiles. Yeah, so that's probably going to be rough for us to implement in a day. So we're going to stick with this, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a water tile map and a non-water tile map. I'm curious as to if I can get this working with the existing tile map though, so let's try that, but it's possible that we'll end up pivoting to having two tile maps. So if I go into my tile set, I'm going to add this, and what happens here if I add a water tile? Did I put water at 5? Yeah. Water colliding with the player, that doesn't change. And for terrain, I'm gonna add water. It's gonna be blue. So if I paint physics layer 1 on these, and I want my collision to be on the water specifically, our frog's probably going to look like Jesus. And for this is going to be in our first terrain set. This is going to be water. So is this. So it's got a collision on physics layer 0, now 1 for these tiles. And now if I'm looking at my water tiles, there's no collision on physics layer 0, and there's a collision on the water physics layer 1 that is slightly off by a pixel. There we go. So if I go back to the tile map, I'm going to get Actually, I need to go back to the tile set. So hoping I could create a pattern here. So tile map editing mode. It's interesting that it's not letting me select these to create a pattern. Like I'd have to almost select it here. So let's do this. So let's go and add 2 water tiles. Actually, I'm going to remove this and go and add the different one. I'm going to go and now just go in selection mode, select both of these. There we go, and it's going to give me my pattern, and now I can add my water. And yeah, that's going to be the challenge. I'm going to need multiple layers for this either way, but let's see how this reacts for now. And in my original tile map, getting to erase a few tiles here, and I'm going to change my winning area. Actually, I don't need to change the winning area specifically. And what I want to see on the player scene is if I actually, or in the jump I should say, if I actually trigger anything when hitting water. But I have a feeling I need a custom method to go and tell me exactly what I collided with. And that's going to be something we won't have the luxury of building on time. Yeah, so it doesn't actually detect anything there. And I think it didn't even detect the other layer we're colliding with yet. So I'm gonna go and change this to 2 tile maps, which again, probably super overkill. So we're gonna go to the tile set, and I really want to remove this and this one, and this is going to be, did I save this tile set already? No. So we're going to save this in terrain tile set with the original tile set I have. And what we're going to do, we're going to remove our water collision for now and our water references. So we know terrain is working and it doesn't break anything there. And we're going to create a new tile map. So this is going to be now terrain tile map. And we're going to create another tile map. This is definitely something that in a future version of the game I would optimize, so that one tile map with multiple layers can give me absolutely everything I'm looking for. So this is going to be my water tile map now, and I will create a new tile set. We now know that this is 96 by 96 pixels. My first physics layer will be the water colliding with the player. And terrain set, we're going to add ourselves a water terrain. And I don't think we need anything else in here. We only have one layer, so we could have changed to have multiple layers. so that the water would appear behind. Instead, we're just going to use the editor to have the water tile map show up behind the terrain tile map and make sure that the frog still touches it. So now we're going to have to create the new tiles in the tile map. So from an atlas, we're going to get our tile set 2. I do want automatic slide or automatic tiles created. I don't want a terrain for this. And I want to make sure that in my, so painting in my physics, I'm only colliding with the water here, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Beautiful. And what else? We're going to change to make sure that this is our water terrain. Not that that's really needed for us. Don't need modulating. Don't need a Z index. We're going to go to our tile map now. I don't need erasing. I do want to show both of these. Here, I'm going to select these and create these as a pattern. And be able to create a long line of this much more easily than what we were doing. We're going to put the terrain tile map over here so it's going to appear. And what is, okay, no, that's a warning that I'm on different layers. Beautiful. And I'm going to hide this for now, and we're going to see how this behaves before we potentially permanently remove the platform. The spider looking much bigger than the flies is really cool. It gives us something very different, and because of the look of that specific spider, it makes sense that it looks way scarier than either the frog or the flies. So let's see, we hit this, but we actually hit the water collision. That's interesting. Let's see, can we actually see which tile set we hit? We did hit a tile set with water. That's interesting because there shouldn't be a collision. Okay, that's strange. I thought that had applied. It appears it did not. So we want our player to hit something like this. Don't realize why the paint's not working, but still a bit wonky, but this should work. I'm not particularly understanding why the paint function didn't do anything to this, but we're gonna start this again, and we're gonna go see if we're still having this issue. There we go. That makes more sense. So now the player hits at the right spot and we win, and we're not going under here. But I also this will disappear with the collision boxes, so that's fine. I'm gonna close this for now, and then I'm going to remove the platform. Or actually, I'm going to hide the platform for now, and what we're going to do is extend the water tile map. I'm going to remove, or the terrain tile map, and I'm going to remove the original here. I'm going to go to my tiles, and in my tile map, I do want to create these two as a pattern. So I'm going to go and select these. I want this to be a pattern. I'm going to delete both of these tiles. I'm going to move these here. And then I'm going to create a gigantic line that's going to go all the way to the beginning of the level. So a line from this pattern that goes all the way to where the frog is starting. And just because we don't have the water yet, I'm going to add my leftmost corner somewhere else. But the idea, and I don't know how close I'll get to this, but the idea is the game would start with the frog in the water, comes up, and then goes from essentially coast to coast. So let's give this a go. Beautiful. This is really working well. And here we go, and here's how we win. So this is perfect. Now all we'd have to do would be to change the enemies and kind of mess everything. So we're going to save our tile set for water so that we can reuse this consistently. And we're going to call this water tile set. So now we can reuse this for the next level that's going to be created much easier. We're going to make a change to our level controller now. I realize I've been zoned in, not checked the comments in a while. We're going to make sure that we have our water tile map. And we're also going to make sure that we have a terrain tile map. So that true composition, because this is not the final instance of this scene we're going to use, but now we have all of our composition patterns set up. So our player, our winning area, and I'm not sure if we still need the winning area or if the water does it, because that's technically the water's job now. So we emit this, but I'm not sure if we still use this. Gonna do a quick test before I start deleting stuff and see if we can win without hitting the area. I'm also gonna remove collision shapes and get started. This looks really cool. There's probably just a little bit to do with the camera to just bring us slightly above, but this is as close to perfect as it gets. I'm surprised I missed that fly. Yeah, we don't need the winning area anymore. So I'm gonna remove this. I'm gonna go in my code, and this is just a product of the refactoring that's been done and some of the changes that simplify the code with the state machine, where the player understands when the players reach the winning area rather than hitting an event in the win area. So this simplifies what we need to have here, like by a lot. And I don't need to create pre-made scenes of my tile maps and the components, just because the tile set's going to handle most of it. Creating the tile map's going to let us do the rest of the work of drawing the tile map as we want. And we're drawing a platform, but the advantage of a tile map is that if I'm deciding I want to create platforms as in a platformer, this would allow us to do it as simple as this. You just go and you're essentially painting into. So for a top-down 2D game, for example, this is a really efficient way to go and basically draw your level. For us, with a platform, that's a bit easier. There's also something really cool we could do with randomizing, but with 2 tiles, it's probably not going to be. For now, it's just going to be a pattern. But there is a function when you're drawing to actually randomize the tile out of these two. So I'm actually going to do it now. So I'm just going to remove all of these, and I'm going to draw a random line without the eraser on. That would help. And see, sometimes the tile is going to repeat, sometimes it won't. So we can't actually randomize these. So I'm going to go back to my original version of this. We also get a warning here telling us that this is on a different tile map. I'd have to check exactly what's the warning it's giving me. Is it because I added this earlier? Oh yes, this is a reference to tiles that no longer exist. So this is the water tiles from earlier that don't exist. There we go. So that's just housekeeping, but it gets rid of something that we don't need here. And I didn't realize I still had the platform. But just to make sure, it's going to sit here for now, and we're going to validate that our terrain's doing its work. Yep. This is a strange interaction. Let's make sure I can at least eat some bugs. There we go. Yeah, okay. It's just something with the middle of the hitbox there. Yeah, there we go. So this is working fine. We're going to hit the water. We win. Eventually we're going to need to add next levels, but for now we're roughly where we want to be. The last thing that we're going to want to add, so I want to delete my platform here and go back to was it here? Yeah, that was my test platform. So let's go see my main scene. Okay, so we don't really need this anymore. I don't need a terrain here anymore. And then this is still working as expected. I just validate the water. And this is just going to be sanity testing every time I make a change, but making sure that as I delete things, whatever I deleted did not end up causing a bigger problem than what I'm trying to fix. There's a smoother way to do this where I could have went and checked that the inherited scene, like which scene it was specifically, and then go and delete that rather than what I've done. So see, it's saying it can't save this scene. I don't want to save it because I've just deleted it, which is a weird thing that happens in Godot. When you delete a scene, if you have it open, it keeps it open, and I guess that's a way to potentially go and recreate it if you need to. But that's a bit of a weird one. All right, we have our water and our terrain working. The last thing I want to do is add a background to this level. And it doesn't need to be animated right now. We just have a gradient SVG. Whoa. I was trying to move this. Yeah, so move mode, we're going to create this where the gradient's going to be towards the bottom, and then we're going to expand this. I'm really shooting myself with the move here. So expand this downwards, and we're going to move it towards here. I need just a bit more. So something like this. I need this to be at the top so that everything is visible beyond it. And then I'm going to drag this to the moon. Not literally to the moon, but enough that it covers the whole level, and that I can roughly move this. And now we got a background. Just gonna give it a little bit more in terms of height and crank this up. There we go. So now it looks like it looks a lot better in the gray background. I actually really like this. And even if it's the same gradient, it looks like it's moving a lot more than just a gray background because of the gradient effects. This looks amazing. We're almost there. So just because I really like it, I'm also going to add this to the main menu. And we'll have to figure out what we do in terms of title and a few other things on the screens. But so adding a child node, we're going to add a picture. Here, so our sprite, we could have done this, I think, with a texture rectangle in controls. Probably the overkill way to do it, but I think both of them are as close to equivalent as can be. So now we're going to open our game. Interesting, I'm getting something different than the viewport. Let's see what this looks like. Not sure why that happened. But there we go. Now we got a background. It looks really amazing. And it's starting to look like a video game. So just to test the stuff I was saying for my own sanity here. So I'm pretty sure I can do the same thing with a texture rectangle. Sprite has more options because it's tied to Node 2D, and it's going to give us a lot more of configuration. But texture rectangle would be, it manipulates a little bit differently as well, clearly. So I could also anchor this to be the full menu rectangle. I'm not sure how it renders. Does it? Yeah, this fully expands. Why does it do that? Okay, yeah. So if I scale 1 to 1, then it's automatically going to take the full rectangle. We could cheat and do this with the frog and the camera as well. I'm expanding it across the level, but it could just be a background that follows. But then this removes the option in the game of doing a moving background. It makes sense for the menu. So I'm going to remove the sprite 2D here. I also need to change this. This is starting to annoy me. I'm going to get a center container instead. I want my center container to automatically expand through. And then we're going to add ourselves a VBox. And we're going to add some separation here. There we go. And eventually we could do something with the buttons instead of labels, and we got a title at the top. But we're going somewhere. Okay. So we got quite a bit done fairly quickly. Now turning the level into something that's component based rather than the current version I have, it's not going to be very complicated. We're just going to create an empty scene I want this on levels, so I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to color it slightly differently to get something visible. This is going to be a 2D scene, and this is an empty node. This is going to be called level controller base, because I want to inherit from it. And the first thing we're going to do here, add our script. So go back to our scripts, and we're going to go find our level controller. So now we know that we need a player, an enemy, or an enemy's node, which this version of the implementation might be a bit overkill. I can probably do this here and have this automatically added, but it doesn't matter. Windscreen, loose screen, water tile map, terrain tile map, and then when we're getting ready, a packed scene for the next level, which should be any other scene that we have. We're going to save this as is. I also want the background in there in the near future, so we might as well add that now. call this background sprite. And then we can start asserting that we have everything we need to function. Enemies is probably not needed, but for now, we'll assert our lose screen. And normally I'd put an error message, but we're going to do this quick and dirty. I want to assert my water tile map. I want to assert my terrain tile map. And I also want to assert my background sprite. So this should give us roughly everything we need. And now if we design an initial level, so this is just a placeholder. We're going to go and create a new inherited scene. I'm going to save this as level 1. That saved in a weird spot. Let's close this. And we're going to move this back to where it should have been in the first place. There we go. Going to open that back up. So this is going to be our viewport. This is our initial 0, coordinate. So first thing we need to add the player. We're going to go find our player scene. Player scene, we're going to create ourselves an instance. This comes preset with everything that's needed. Then what else do we need here? And the player is also part of a group, which is required as part of my state machine to go and get the reference to the player itself. Then after this, enemies, this was just a sample or an empty node 2D. I'm going to call this enemies. And we're going to make sure to assign these as we create them. So we've got our player. We've got our enemy here. Same thing for win screen and losing screen. So our winning screen should be in our menus. Yeah. So we're going to instantiate that. We're going to instantiate our lose screen as well. Not here though. Yeah. There we go. We're going to hide both of these. They should not be visible. And we're going to go and set them. I'm going to do the background first before I do the tile maps. So sprite 2D. Bring this back up top. So for the background, I'm going to set the texture initially, but I'm not really going to play with this until I know what my level is. In terms of the sizing, I'm going to create both my tile maps now. Can I duplicate this? Or there we go. So this is going to be water tile map. This will be terrain tile map. So the ugly trick I did earlier in the scene is the objects draw from top to bottom. So sprite is in the back behind everything because it's the first object straight down from, and as soon as you draw other objects, they draw on top of the previous ones, the lower objects in the tree. So this is how we get the water and terrain tile map to play nice, for lack of a better term, and give us what we want with the water coming in behind the terrain. Just going to close a few things for a bit of clarity and not to get notifications. There we go. So water tile maps, instead of creating a new tile set here, we're going to go and get our already pre-configure water tiles. And I could actually grab both of these and start drawing. So my collisions should already be set. Or did this somehow not retain? So I want this here. And I want this roughly here. I just wanted a pixel above the water to make sure that we collide and not sink in. Okay, we're gonna go back to our selection, and yeah, our polygons are still set as is. Not sure what changed there. We're just gonna save it to make sure it retains that. Okay, and then I do have a pattern that I can rely on if needed, but why is this not letting me draw now? I go back to my tile map. That's so strange. I don't get this. Okay, it's because I was on the spriting tools. Okay, so what I wanted here originally was my pattern. And I just want to be able to put my pattern here. I don't actually need to move this. I need to be able to make my sprite here and it's not visible. Okay, this is weird. Okay, it's a painting button that I need to select. There we go. So put this, so we're gonna put one here, and we're gonna put another one right here, and what's gonna move here is the player. Or actually, the easier way to do this is we're gonna start from 0, 0. So 0, 0 being here, we would want the player to land. So if I select my player now, I'm going to change my initial position to be roughly here, and there's going to be a tile that's going to come right there. So if I go on my terrain tile map now, make this visible, we're going to select our existing tile set. I'm just going to go validate that none of the funny business from earlier happened. Yeah, okay. So this is fine, and now we're going to go and paint. So I need an initial tile here. And I want to have some runway to figure out how long can I make a level before I need the water, because we're going to balance around that. There you go. So my hand tool. So now if I was to boot this, this is gonna not redirect to that level. It's still going to our main scene. This is also gonna give me a bit of grief. We'll just change the main scene to make sure we have. So what was it complaining about? The tile maps. So we're gonna give the tile maps to this. Yeah, no, it's a different control. So it's our main scene here that probably doesn't have the background. There we go. But we'll make sure that our level has everything we need to run. There we go. So now this still boots the main level until we go and make the changes to the code, because right now everything's kind of hard coded to that specific scene. So if we go to the main menu, here instead of main scenes, we're going to pick our level 1, correct the formatting here, and now this should boot our new scene in which there's no enemies yet. There we go. And now I'm curious how much we have before we need to actually add insects or bugs to eat for the frog to have something to do for the level. So I can probably double this trip easily. So we're going to go to our level 1. And what I'm going to do here, I want the hand tool. I'm going to select my tile map. And actually, this is going to be slightly overkill, but whoa, nope. I want the line tool. So we're going to do something like this for now. I'm going to go back to the hand tool. Actually, we're going to save here. We're going to see if we're still getting close to 0. I'll expand the background later. And I want to know, without the frog trying to use the tongue and try to hit targets, how far can we go before there's anything that actually goes wrong? Or before the frog basically gets to 0 HP. So it looks like I'm going to get there. Okay. So this is good. So for now, at the end of this, We're going to go back to our painting tools and our tile map. So I want to add specifically my tile here, and on my water tile map, I do want to paint a few of these. That's going to be my winning condition. And that looks roughly like a first level without any enemies. Just going to do some changes to include the background here. And we're going to add to the tile map for the water specifically. I want 2 of these. So 1, 2. There we go. So that our frog starts in a decent spot. I noticed something that drives me crazy already, but I need more water here for continuity. So we're going to go to our tile map again. Draw just another 2 here, and this should work. There we go. So we're going to have that done, and the viewport doesn't show anything where there's no ground or anything. So this looks better. Now we need to start adding enemies. So I really need to shrink all of these. Actually, I'm pretty sure I don't need this anymore. So we're going to remove the winning area that's no longer useful. I'm going to find my script for it as well. There we go. Okay, collapse these. I'm going to color code enemies just so I recognize them better. I'm going to start by adding a few flies. Oh wow, that started in a weird spot. So I'm going to add a fly here. I'm just going to repeat this a few times. I want this one to be a bit higher. I'll have to test what's the highest line I can give for the frog to reach flies, and then just to see how far we can get. I'm gonna add another fly. There, something like this. So we're going to give ourselves just a bit more of HP, assuming I don't miss like this. But this should start bringing a challenge with the cursor being a bit wonky in terms of what we're hitting and what we're not hitting with relation to the frog. And now it's going to take us a while to actually get to the edge of the level. And I'm not sure we're actually hitting those flies. That first level is probably way too big. Yeah, we're getting to the flies now, so we're going to add a lot more. And then in between, we're going to add a few spiders. So on something to scare the player roughly when we get here. I think that's roughly the right height. What was the right one? just over the background. So we're going to do something like this. I want another spider that's going to be towards the middle or the end of the level. And I'm going to want more flies too. Actually, I want something to pop up right before. And I'm going to make a few of these flies basically trapped because there's going to be a spider guarding it, for lack of a better term. But something that's going to make it difficult for the player to just get the fly. Just going to have another trap fly here. And I want this one to be almost directly hit by the spider. That'd be even better. Like right in front of it. So let's see how this looks. The other thing is, as the levels go on, the flies don't give a whole lot of energy. So we need to be able to skip the spiders. The line did not appear, which means the background has introduced a bug there that we'll have to figure out. That's probably the Z index that was solving all my problems, but oh wow, I cannot aim to save my life. Yeah, this is maybe a bit too low. Yeah, maybe the distance range is going to need to be 100 by default for the spider, considering that that's one spider's height. Or maybe I go change that now. So if I go to my spider enemy, which I still have here, in my base, I'm going to change this to 100 in terms of plus variance. Maybe even 150, but 200 is going to be too much. We'll start with 100 for now, and we'll see where that lands. I guess this is the other challenge, but for the background sprite, I'm going to want this to be -1 in index, and this should fix the bug that we have with the lines for the spiders. I don't know if the change to spiders is actually going to fix it on the instances. That might be something to go do. Yeah, it doesn't. Okay, so this definitely got fixed. That's good. So that's probably a bit too challenging. I need a bit more. I need a bit more flies. But let me see the spider specifically. Okay, this automatically cranked that back to 100. That's good. Yeah. So we're gonna add more flies, just to give players a chance. It is the first level. We don't want this to be super overkill. And I also realize I've been putting flies a little bit too high because it's going to make the aiming very challenging. Still want this one as a trap though. Let's see if we can get 2 in a shot here. And I'll see if I can add this somewhere else. Let's try before the spider trap here. Let's see if we're able to get there with the frog. And with the fly change, the animation is still a bit wonky, which is why I miss a lot more than I actually succeed with that animation. But we'll fix this with the fly so that it's a bit less unfair to players. That was a mistake. So the benefit of potentially hitting 2 flies at once would be to only use up the HP once to shoot out the tongue, and then you get the double healing. Otherwise the net healing is only 3 if you only get one fly here. I think I got all the way to here, so we just need a few more flies and this should be something that can get cleared. And then once we start adding agreements, and what we'll add for the agreements is that for the first level it's probably don't eat spiders, and it's probably as simple as that. But I do envision a shorter version of a level where the agreement specifically would be only shoot your tongue out X times, or only eat a number of bugs. So the idea is to get to the end of the level consuming as little as possible and trying to maximize when you're using the frog's tongue mechanic. So it would make for a different kind of challenge. We got a few more spiders just to scare people. And we're gonna add one right before the end. And that one's gonna have 2 flies nearby. So we're gonna want something here. Make a last one that's going to be right there before the player jumps to freedom, and then there's probably some room. There's a few too many spots that don't have anything, so this should be a good time to add something. And then this is probably decent, and one last one. And how many spiders do I have? 5. Can I add a 6th one somewhere? Let's add another fly and fill in the blank here. And I think let's add a random spider that's not near the flies. Although it makes sense that the spider would be close to the fly because they're basically competing for the same food as the frogs. Let's give this a go. And let's see if I can clear this. There we go, going good so far. Probably still not enough, yeah. So I really just need more flies overall. But the level is getting fairly lengthy, so this is working out decent. And I do want flies at a different angle, but one thing to probably do eventually would be to have lines based on the terrain. Establish what are the lines where the frog can and can't hit, and make this a bit more easy to design. There, so I'm going to give this as another spot where the player can potentially get 2 flies. And I'm going to add a few more. Let's see if we can land here. Here and here as well. Yeah. The other challenging mechanic is that the cursor does not actually stop when the player is jumping. So this means that your run is slightly different based on when you're shooting out your cursor. Surprised that one missed. So the one other thing I'm going to do, just because the jump takes 5 health, we're going to change this. That makes the level a bit difficult given that the player gets 20 jumps at the most. Did I actually change this here? Or no? No, I did put this in the player. Okay. So we're going to make this -3, and this should make the game make a bit more sense, and then you'll recover a lot more relative to each jump when you're actually getting a bug, because otherwise you can potentially lose the run fairly quickly. That spider is way too low. It's kind of funny how bad I am at the game that I'm working on. So with 3, I barely make it to the water. I did miss a lot, which uses up a lot of energy, but at least the first level is still winnable. So I think this is in a decent spot for now, and we know roughly this is what, 12,000 units, so on 1920, that's about 7 or 8 screen widths. Where the other thing that we could do would be make the frog jump a bit more, but I think that's something that we'll probably tweak with the agreements, where your frog jump would either cost you less or your base velocity for it changes, which means your frog can jump farther or not as far, depending on if you completed an agreement successfully or if you did not get the buff, if you failed the agreement and you get the debuff for the next round. But it looks like we're going to be in a decent spot to be able to submit this tomorrow. We still need to tweak the fly a little bit, but other than that, most of the mechanics are in a good spot. The other thing to do is probably play with the cursor, because it is a bit aggressive and potentially very hard for players to win. It'll take quite a bit of getting used to, so let me see if I can tweak this a bit. Let's see if a very, very small change in speed is going to work. I had done this around being 1 second. Like 1 second from end to end. It might be that I actually need the cursor to be a bit faster to make sure that we can get both ends. Yeah. So it's not 0.45. I think what we want here is 0.6. Yeah. And it's not too fast that a player can't aim. Although with the jumping it gets a bit rough, I think. It's still a lot. Yeah, I'm not sure what's the right value for that. Or if we just change the path so we're not shooting 90 degrees up. That might be the more suitable solution. That's odd that I got the spider, not the fly there. Yeah, I think removing the option to go almost 90 degrees up is the better call. Or the longer cooldown between frog jumps is another option. And I still have the bug where I'm not losing when I hit the ground at 0. I'm losing when I hit the ground at the end of the jump. So it should be if I'm idle that I get to 0. It should be when I lose. So there's a few things to fix. Because we do want a player that is hitting 0 HP. So if I go through this. So we got a player that's here that jumps and gets to 0 HP and hits the water. I still want the player to be able to win there. I want a last-ditch effort not to result in a failed run if the player makes it to the water, because the whole point of the game is the frog making it to the water. So that's something that we don't want to take away. I'd want the player to be successful there and be rewarded for making it even with no energy left. So let's see if we can make the player... Is it worth tweaking the cursor at this point? So I'm just going to take some backup measurements of my curve. And since we're not putting flies directly on the ground, the 255 here doesn't make sense at all. So just taking notes here. So that I can revert this if I ever need to. So if my path were to be something a bit closer to this, so this would be roughly 80 degrees. Let's make this a bit lower. Let's call that 45-15. So here this would probably be 210, and this would probably be, if we're going up 15, I do want this to be a bit of a square trajectory though. Yeah, that's gonna look weird. So let's do 15 and 15 as a starting point. I'm going to try to apply that for both. And we're just going to change how the curve behaves here. So we still retain our circular curve. And with the change in speed, let's go see how this behaves. The only thing I think, and this is where I miss Unity over Godot's editor, but not having a direct view to debug on of exactly where I'm at makes this a bit difficult. There we go, got two of them. This is starting to be a bit easier. I say as I make mistakes, but I guess the other thing to do would probably to not make shooting so punishing to the player in terms of health, or to make catching a bug more rewarding if it's that punishing. To at the same time, I feel like now I'm starting to make the game compensate for me being bad at it, which is not a great pattern. But there's some bugs that definitely land in an awkward spot for the player to catch, like these. But I made it with 38 HP, which I was nowhere close to earlier, so clearly this potentially helps. But yeah, there's going to be something to check with coordinates on levels to make sure that the player lands in a bit of a better spot with some of the flies. So like this one, we need to be able to touch that earlier. It's the same thing for this. There's probably a magic number where I need to not put flies and have something of a range to be able to put flies in based on the jump of the frog, which is I think 350 units, but I wish there was a way to kind of mark every spot. It's probably something I got to do with tracing for the old position, new position, find the delta, and then play around that with the flies and know that there's kind of an area with the tongue where I'm able to hit or able to not hit. All right, with that being said, we finally have a full level, looking a bit closer to the end of the project here. There's still some things to tweak, and we'll probably do a lot of this overnight, and tomorrow we're going to add agreements or walk through what we'll have done for agreements, and then look into adding a next level to the game so that there's a few levels when we submit. My idea is that we're going to design around 4 or 5 levels, because this is a demo in a Jam project, but a future version of this is where I want to design different monsters, different buffs, different debuffs, so that even if the game ends up being 50 to 100 levels total, it's a different experience in sets and increments of, 5 to 10 levels. And there's potentially ways to add to that in the future as well. But having different mechanics so that it's not 50 to 100 levels of the exact same experience, like throw a wrench in every few levels, potentially themes in increments of 5 levels or things like that. So we're going to stop here for now. There's some work that we'll do overnight, and we'll stream again tomorrow. And obviously the submission's due tomorrow, so we'll be submitting the game by the end of the last stream, and we'll do a bit more content about our experience in the game jam, what went well, what didn't, what we do different, what we would not do different. So stay tuned for more. Tune in tomorrow. We're probably going to start in early afternoon for the stream, given that the submission I think is due late afternoon tomorrow, Eastern time. So stay tuned, and please join the stream tomorrow. Please, if you've not already subscribed to our Twitch channel, please subscribe. Please follow us on Twitch. Please subscribe on YouTube, and check out the VODs if you missed some of the previous content. But thanks everyone for coming around this afternoon, and hope you have a great day, and we'll see